The program has all the familiar Windows features like menus at the top of the screen and a large number of optional toolbars. The business portion of the program is the drawing area. This is where the actual drawings will be created. Both IntelliCAD and AutoCAD allow a lot of customization. I wouldn't recommend any drastic changes to the look and feel of the program until you're comfortable with where to find these features in the menu structure. You'll notice the crosshairs in the drawing area. These are the equivalent of the cursor. As you move your mouse, the crosshairs will also move. To be productive with your CAD program, you should invest in at least a 3-button mouse. The third button being a wheel. Moving the mouse allows the crosshairs to move in the X and Y direction, and the wheel allows you to zoom into the drawing to see things more clearly. Some firms use a very sophisticated mouse called a digitizer, which we're not going to discuss in this class. Like most Windows programs these days, there are usually more than one way to activate a command. The menu system is what I call the longhand way to get to a particular command, because it requires more mousing and leaves the other hand idle. Throughout the class, I'll try to demonstrate both options, but you'll see that using the command line at the bottom of the screen is faster. Now let's talk a little bit about model and paper space. Let's start with model space. Think of model space as a model of the actual objects you are trying to draw. I think of it as a representation of the actual or real world. Objects created in model space can be drawn as either 2 or 3D objects. When we look at a drawing on the screen, we're typically viewing a 2D world, having only a length and width, or what we'll call X and Y dimensions. We will be drawing in 3D when we create points and contours, but let's not get too far ahead. One of the most important concepts associated with model space is that you are creating geometry at full scale. You're asking, how is that possible? Well, consider that model space is an electronic representation of an infinite universe right in your computer. We have the ability to zoom in or out to a scale that allows us to see it in a meaningful way. So when drawing in model space, 1 unit of measure is 1 unit of measure in the real world. For example, 1 foot shown on the screen, even though we may be zoomed in or out, is 1 foot in our world too. It is not scaled down. We zoom our screen for viewing, but it is drawn to scale. It doesn't matter to the computer what that unit of measure is. It could be feet, meters, or inches. When drawing by hand, you first have to decide what scale you're going to draw, because the model is also the paper drawing. The key concept with model space is that it represents a full-size representation of your object. Paper space is easier to understand because it does work with scale. Paper space is exactly as its name implies, a representation of the printed or paper version of your drawing. In paper space, you decide at which scale you'll be printing, also known as plotting, and set the screen up to represent that scale. For example, our printed drawing will use a scale of 1 inch equals 20 feet. So the paper space layout will be set to that scale. Like model space is a representation of the real world, paper space is a representation of model space. Within the CAD program, you'll find tabs at the bottom of the screen. There will always be one Model tab. but there may be many layout or paper space tabs. Each layout tab can represent a different portion of your model space and also be at a different scale. As an example, you might want to show the entire subdivision on a single sheet at 1 inch equals 100 feet, and then have just the septic design on another sheet or layout at 1 inch equals 20 feet. You'll find that using paper space is a personal choice, and when your drawing is relatively simple, it may not be needed. There will be more on this subject as we progress. As we discussed, you'll find the Model and Layout tabs at the bottom of the screen. A drawing will only have one Model tab, but again can have many Layout tabs. Remember that model space is our real and complete world, whereas layouts are only scaled versions, printed versions of that world. It's hard to believe, but that brings us to the end of Chapter 1. Let's review. CAD was shown to be a replacement for hand drawing and how it can and has had a lasting impact on the way we do things. CAD has allowed the reuse of existing work, or what we called blocks, shortening both the drafting and design process. AutoCAD and IntelliCAD are two of the most popular CAD platforms used today, which both support custom add-ins like Carlson Survey. In looking at the CAD environment, we found the familiar Windows components like menus and toolbars that we're used to seeing in other Windows programs. We now understand that model space is a full-scale electronic representation of the real world, and that paper space is used to create printed layouts of our model space.